Hi. All right, let's talk about fish evolution. So you'll see here on slide one, there's a bunch of little videos. Let me just preview those for you. So this is the 3D reconstructed plate from a placoderm fish. So these are early fish, and they have bones around their head, including kind of shielding their brain, at least from the top. And it looks like they have teeth, but they're not teeth like you and I would think of them. They are actually jaw bones that are sharpened into the shape of teeth and function as them. So pretty cool. Yeah. And they're armored on the head, but not elsewhere. So that's really cool. You can kind of make out the shape of the brain from that. Here we have let's see, a very early placoderm that's going to have, here's the little jaw bones, yeah, yeah, and these are the things that are not really teeth but are kind of like them, at least on the top, and then there's the jaw bones on the bottom that are going to end up being similar to what we see later in more advanced fish, more similar to the ones we have today. And sorry, there. Get rid of that, get rid of that. All right, here is a different fish. These are sawfish. I love this video because this is a sawfish actually using its saw appendage. Let's see that again. So there's a fish and bam, that's what that's for. Yeah, people have used these as weapons. People that live on islands where these things are common, and it's just trying to whack stuff out of the water above it, like out of the sky, but actually out of the water, and kind of shred it up. It does the job of killing, and then yeah, the sawfish can just go along the bottom and pick up the pieces that are tasty and already pre-cut. So that's a very nice way to eat your dinner, I think. Here is a frilled shark, and they are very weird looking creatures. Yeah, there we go. So these are chondrichthyan fish, a relatively early appearing branch. So it's not that they're necessarily primitive, it's just that they split off fairly early in fish evolution. Here is something ridiculous about a megalodon. These are these giant sharks. There we go. And it's a fairly close relative of the great white shark. They were just much, much, much bigger. Raw, yeah. And from that little tiny plastic model, you can't tell how big they are, but they are big. We have some of the teeth. The tooth is about the size of my hand, and there was a whole mouth full of these things. Yeah, I couldn't probably stand up inside their jaws, but it could tear me to pieces pretty easily, I think is the message to take away from that. Here is another thing that is called a fish, but I don't even know that you would want to say it's a real fish. It's a Sarcopterygian. So these are going to be a lot closer to tetrapods like us, because inside of its fins it's got little bones, and it's got one bone at the top of the arm and two bones in this part of the arm, and then a whole bunch of bones right up here at the end, kind of like a little tiny person arm, just happens to be operating a fin. So it's like when you put on a swim fin, and it changes the exterior, but the interior stays the same. And as we know in paleontology, it's what's on the inside that counts. So there's some divers going down to actually see that. And yeah, we don't need Dunkleosteus versus the Mosasaur. Yeah, that's fantastic, though. Fantastic work. We do need the Dunkleosteus reconstruction. Let's see if we can get that to open. Okay, it's opening up there with a little advert. So we will come back to that as soon as that is over. There we go. Here is our Dunkleosteus up here, swimming around, looking great. This is our placoderm fish, sort of armored on the head on the outside. It has bones throughout the rest of it, we think, but cartilaginous, rarely preserved, and we have to kind of estimate the length of these things based on other similar placoderm fish. Just last year, at the time of recording anyway, there was a revision to this. They actually figured out that the earlier reconstructions were reconstructing it as much longer than it probably was relative to other most similar fish, where we actually did have the full length preserved. What you want to observe down by the tail is this is called a heterocercal tail, meaning that it's different on the top and the bottom. Like the top is long and the bottom is short in this case. That is a feature of early branching fish. You'll find that on sharks, for example. Later branching fish you will find with a homocircle tail, which is just two little fins that are about the same size, instead of one that's kind of long and the other that's kind of short, like that. Yeah. All right. Get rid of that. Put our Dunkleosteus back on, and let's get into it. There we go. Move this over. All right. Very professional. And yeah, slide set from Dr. Dave Swanson, University of South Dakota, because it's a good one. Okay, so there are jawless fishes, and we think these are the ones that are branching the earliest. And so there are these are among the oldest documented vertebrate fossils. There are things back in the early Cambrian that are clearly chordates. Two of these things are Hycuichthyes and Hycuella, I want to say. And you find those at Chengjiang. So they are not common, although you do get little piles of one of those. The other, there are only a few known. And I certainly haven't ever seen one appear for sale online, although it probably has somewhere, just not to me. And I couldn't afford it anyway. So then these are going to develop, and they're going to alter. They're going to have a single nasal opening, which is kind of weird. Some of these fish down at the bottom are going to be like lampreys, hagfish, which are marvelous little fish. They've got a real coating of slime on the outside of them that has some proposed medicinal properties. I think people just like these fish because they're really cool looking. These are going to be scavengers. These are going to be almost like parasites. I think that's probably the nicest way to say it. Latching onto and drinking from other fish. So, good for them. And those look a lot like the earliest fish-like animals that we have in the fossil record. Famously, there's a book called There's No Such Thing as a Fish. I want to say it's Stephen Jay Gould, but I may be crossing him up with somebody else. And the point of that is that there are so many things that we call fish, and they're actually not very closely related to each other. And there are groups that emerge out of those, including tetrapods. So if there is such a thing as a fish, we are fish. And if there's not such a thing as a fish, then there's a bunch of different animals that all have names. And fish has no meaning. Sorry, pescatarians. Yeah, fish don't exist. Oh my gosh, as a class. Yeah. They wouldn't have more genetically in common with all the other fish than they do with other groups that are not considered fish. That's all that means. Okay, let's come back to conodont elements. Yeah, you remember these from biostratigraphy? And here's our little chart. This is conodont elements with no heating during their fossilization, up to pretty high heating, probably 300-400 degrees Celsius, maybe a little higher. And right in the middle, they go sort of a chocolatey brown. And these are the little teeth of a jawless fish that we will show on some of the next slides. But they are fantastic. And inside the mouth of one animal, there will be many different types of these teeth. And so these are for latching on to something, presumably, and making sure that it doesn't get away, and that the only way it can go is down the throat and not out and away. The teeth themselves are calcium phosphate, so like our bones, but those are the only calcium phosphate parts in the body. So that's the only place where they're doing that biomineralization, if I remember correctly. Everything else would just be cartilage. Here are examples of the rare cases where you get conodont teeth and they're all in place. And I guess we should call them conodont elements. That's the proper term for them. And so, yeah, you can see some of these big ones up at the front for maybe slicing or biting into something, and these little prickly ones at the back maybe for holding the food in, like a knife to cut whatever it is, and then a fork to make sure that it doesn't run off and leave you. And here we have sort of teeth that would be very good for pinching down on something, cutting into it, locking it in place, and at the back we have sort of like a sort of a different kind of knife. So this one is sort of grabbing something and then maybe sawing it up. Presumably there will be some muscles around here that would operate these things, and so it's like a chamber of spikes, like from a, I don't know, B movie of some sort, or we're just going to keep mashing the spikes in to sort of squish up the food so that it can then be digested a little bit better. All right, here is the famous conodont animal fossil, and it's laying kind of face down. Its eyes are right up here, but we're looking down its back, basically, and it's kind of a little bit tipped over on its side at this end. This is what it would look like if it was sideways. These giant capsules up at the front are the eyes. The conodont elements are going to be located right up here, and so here's the conodont elements more or less in place inside of the animal fossil, and that's how people first figured out that, oh, this is what the animal looks like. And here are some others down here at the bottom. So we will pause there, and then we will come back for more fish.